I told my mom how I had always felt invisible in the family. Months later, my uncle repeated my exact words and publicly mocked me at dinner. So I asked her, "You told everyone," and walked out for good. I'm 29 and I need to tell you about the worst Thanksgiving of my life. And look, I know that's a competitive category for a lot of people. Between dry turkey political arguments and that one aunt who always asks why you're still single, Thanksgiving has a long history of producing trauma. But mine takes the cake, or the pie, I guess, since we're talking about Thanksgiving. Either way, let me give you some background first. I grew up in a small town in North Carolina. My mom, Diane, raised me and my older brother, Garrett, mostly on her own after our dad left when I was 7. Dad wasn't a deadbeat exactly. He just sort of faded out of our lives the way a cheap t-shirt loses its color. Every year, he was a little less present until one day you looked up and realized the shirt was basically white, and your dad was basically a stranger who sent a birthday card every other year with a $20 bill inside and no personal message. Mom did her best. I want to be clear about that up front, because I know how this story ends and I don't want anyone thinking I'm some ungrateful kid trashing his mother for no reason. She worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood. She made sure we had food, clothes, a roof. She showed up to school plays and baseball games when she could. She was a good mom in a lot of the tangible, measurable ways. But here's where it gets complicated. Garrett was the favorite, and I don't mean that in the way every younger sibling says it when they're being dramatic. I mean it in the way that was obvious to teachers, neighbors, our grandparents, probably our mailman. Garrett was 2 years older, looked exactly like our dad, and had this effortless charm that made adults love him. He was the kid who could talk his way out of detention and into extra credit in the same conversation. Teachers adored him. Coaches fought over him. Mom looked at him like he hung the moon. Me? I was quiet or awkward. I liked reading and building things with my hands. And I had a stutter until I was about 12 that made every oral presentation feel like walking across hot coals. I wasn't bad at anything. I just wasn't spectacular at anything either. And in a house where Garrett existed, not being spectacular meant being invisible. I want to be fair here. Mom never said she loved Garrett more. She never said anything cruel to my face. It was all in the margins. Garrett's report card went on the fridge. Mine went in a drawer. Garrett's baseball trophies were displayed in the living room. My science fair ribbons ended up in a box in my closet. When Garrett got into NC State, Mom threw a party. When I got a full scholarship to a technical college for engineering, she said, "Oh, that's nice, honey," and went back to watching TV. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, and by the time I was 18, I convinced myself it was all in my head. That's what you do when you're a kid, and the alternative is admitting your own mother doesn't see you. You gaslight yourself because the truth is too heavy to carry. After high school, I moved about 3 hours away to go to school, studied mechanical engineering, graduated near the top of my class, and got a decent job at a manufacturing firm. I wasn't making 6 figures or anything, but I was stable. I had an apartment, a used truck that mostly worked, and a life that was entirely mine. I talked to Mom maybe once every couple weeks. Short calls, surface level. How's work? How's Garrett? Okay, talk soon. Love you. Bye, Garrett. Meanwhile, was living about 20 minutes from Mom. He'd bounced around a few jobs after college, never really landing on anything. Last I heard, he was doing something in sales, which for Garrett meant he was probably charming someone's grandmother into a timeshare. He was also going through his second divorce at 29, which Mom somehow blamed entirely on his ex-wives. According to Diane, Garrett just had bad luck with women. Nothing to do with the fact that Garrett had the emotional depth of a parking lot puddle. Now here's where the story really starts. About a year ago, I started seeing a therapist, not because of some big crisis, just because I'd been carrying this low-grade sadness my whole life, and I figured it was time to actually deal with of just pushing through like I always did. My therapist, Dr. Adler, was this calm, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had a way of asking questions that made you feel like you'd been lying to yourself for decades, which as it turned out, I had been. After about 3 months of sessions, she helped me put words to something I'd never been able to articulate before. It was about Mom, about the favoritism, about the way I'd spent my entire life performing for approval that was never going to come. And she encouraged me to say it out loud. Not to Mom, not yet, just to someone I trusted. So I told Mom, I know, she said someone I trusted, and I went straight to the source of the problem. But here's the thing. I wanted to believe my mom could handle it. I wanted to believe that if I just told her how I felt, she'd listen, she'd understand, and something would shift. I was 28 years old, and I still wanted my mom to see me. That's not weakness. That's just being human. I called her on a Wednesday evening in March. She was home. Garrett was out somewhere, and she sounded relaxed. I told her I'd been seeing a therapist and that I needed to share something with her. She got quiet. I could hear the TV in the background go mute, and I told her everything. I told her that I'd felt invisible my whole life, that I'd watched Garrett get praised and celebrated while I got polite acknowledgement at best. I told her about the report cards, the trophies, the party versus the "that's nice." I told her that I'd spent years wondering what was wrong with me before realizing that maybe the problem wasn't me at all. I told her that I loved her, but that I was tired of pretending the favoritism didn't exist because pretending was killing me slowly. I was shaking by the end. My voice cracked twice, and I had to stop and breathe. It was the hardest thing I'd ever said to anyone. Mom was quiet for a long time, and she said, "Nolan, I had no idea you felt that way. I'm so sorry." And for about 48 hours, I felt lighter than I had in years. I thought we'd turned a corner. I thought honesty had won. I thought my mom had finally heard me. Then Thanksgiving came. Mom's brother, my Uncle Trent, hosts Thanksgiving every year at his place about 40 minutes outside of town. Big house, big yard, big opinions. Trent's the kind of guy who thinks being loud is the same as being right. He's not a bad person exactly, but he's the human equivalent of a bullhorn at a library. Everything is everyone's business, and he delivers his opinions like he's doing you a favor. I almost didn't go that year. Something in my gut told me to skip it to stay home and eat leftover pizza and watch football in my underwear like a normal person. But Mom had called me twice that week to make sure I was coming. She sounded warm. She sounded like she was trying. So I drove 3 hours to Trent's house, walked through the front door, and sat down at a table with 14 members of my extended family. And that's when my world caved in. Dinner started fine, normal even. Trent's wife Lorraine had made her famous cornbread stuffing. My cousin Harper was showing everyone pictures of her new puppy. Garrett was holding court at the far end of the table, telling some story about a golf trip that apparently involved a celebrity sighting that I'm 90% sure he made up. Classic Garrett. Everyone was laughing, plates were full, and I was actually enjoying myself. I was sitting between my cousin Bryce and my Aunt Patty, who's the sweetest woman alive and has never said an unkind word about anyone, which honestly makes her a statistical anomaly in our family. I had a plate piled high with turkey and mashed potatoes, and I was thinking, you know what? Maybe this is going to be a good one. Maybe Mom and I turned a real corner. Then Trent clinked his glass. Now Trent clinking his glass at Thanksgiving is nothing new. He does it every year. Usually it's a toast about family and gratitude and how blessed they are, and everyone raises their glasses and moves on. Standard stuff. But this year Trent had a different kind of energy. He was looking at me. Not glancing looking. Like he'd been waiting for this moment. "I want to say something," Trent announced, and the table went quiet. "We're all family here, and I think family should be honest with each other. So I want to address the elephant in the room." I remember thinking, what elephant? I looked around the table. Nobody else seemed to know what was coming either except Mom. Mom was staring at her plate. She wouldn't look up. "Nolan," Trent said, and hearing my name come out of his mouth like that, like an accusation, made my stomach drop. "Your mother told me about your little therapy session, about how you think she treated you unfairly growing up, how you think Garrett got all the attention and you got the short end of the stick." The table went dead silent. 14 people and not a fork moved. Even Garrett stopped mid-chew. Trent wasn't done. "And I just want to say, as someone who watched your mother bust her tail raising 2 boys on her own, I think that's a pretty crappy thing to lay on her. She sacrificed everything for you kids. Everything. And for you to sit there and tell her she wasn't good enough, that takes some nerve." I couldn't breathe. I literally could not pull air into my lung. Everything I had told my mom in confidence, every raw, vulnerable thing I'd spent months working up the courage to say, was now being recited at a Thanksgiving table by A, who thought vulnerability was a character flaw. I looked at Mom. She was still staring at her plate. Her hands were in her lap. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "You told him I said." My voice came out quieter than I expected, almost calm. But inside I was shattering. Mom's chin trembled. "Nolan, I just needed someone to talk to about it. I didn't think he'd bring it up like this." "Like this," I repeated. "You told him what I said to you in private. Something I told you because I trusted, and he's using it to embarrass me in front of the entire family." Trent jumped back in. "Nobody's embarrassing you, kid. We're just having an honest conversation. If you can dish it out to your mom, you should be able to take it." "I wasn't dishing anything out," I said. "I was telling my mother how I felt. Something I'd been holding in for over 20 years. And I told her, not you. I didn't call you Trent. I didn't send out a family newsletter. I had a private conversation with my mom, and she turned it into Thanksgiving entertainment." Garrett spoke up from the end of the table. "Bro, come on. You're being dramatic. Mom loves you. She loves both of us." "Stay out of this, Garrett," I said. And something in my tone must have landed, because he actually closed his mouth. I looked back at Mom. She had tears running down her face now. "Nolan, please," she whispered. "I didn't mean for this to happen. And here's the thing. Part of me believed her. Part of me looked at my mother crying and wanted to say, it's okay. It's fine. Let's just eat dinner and pretend this never happened. That's the part of me that had been running the show for 28 years. The part that smoothed things over, that swallowed his feelings, that made himself smaller so everyone else could be comfortable. But Dr. Adler's voice was in my head. She told me something a few weeks before that stuck with me. She said, "Nolan, when someone shows you that your feelings aren't safe with them, believe them the first time." So I stood up. "I'm going to leave," I said. Not loud. Not angry, just clear. I came here because you asked me to, Mom, because I thought we were in a better place. But what you did sharing what I told you in confidence, that's exactly the kind of thing I was talking about in that phone call. My feelings have never been safe with you. I just didn't want to believe it. The table was frozen. Aunt Patty had her hand over her mouth. Bryce was staring at his plate like he wished he could teleport. Lorraine was gripping her napkin so hard her knuckles were white. Mom started crying harder. Nolan, sit down, please. We can talk about this. We did talk about it, I said. And you turned it into gossip. Trent opened his mouth to say something else and I held up my hand. Trent, with all due respect, this has nothing to do with you. You don't know what my childhood was like. You saw us at holidays and barbecues. You don't get to tell me what I experienced in my own house. I grabbed my jacket off the back of my chair and walked toward the front door. Garrett caught up to me in the hallway. Dude, you're seriously leaving? It's Thanksgiving. Yeah, Garrett, I'm seriously leaving. And for the record, the reason you don't understand what I'm feeling is because you never had to. You were the one getting the attention. You were the golden child. So I get that this seems like an overreaction to you, but it's not. He didn't have a response to that. He just stood there in the hallway with his hands in his pockets while I walked out the front door and into the cold November air. I drove home in silence. No radio, no phone calls, nothing. Just 3 hours of highway and the sound of my own thoughts. I kept replaying it in my head. Trent's voice, Mom's face, the way she wouldn't look at me, the way she said she needed someone to talk to about it. Like my pain was a burden she had to offload rather than something she should have actually sat with and addressed. By the time I got home, I was numb. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of my apartment complex for almost an hour. It was cold enough that I could see my breath. I didn't turn the heat on. I just sat there and let the reality wash over me. My mom had taken the most vulnerable thing I'd ever shared with her and handed it to someone else. Not to process it with a therapist, not to reflect on it privately. She gave it to Trent, the loudest, least empathetic person in our family, and he'd weaponized it at a dinner table in front of everyone I was related to. I'd spent 20 years convincing myself the favoritism was in my head. I'd spent 3 months in therapy working up the nerve to say something. I'd spent 1 phone call bearing my soul, and in return, I got publicly humiliated at Thanksgiving. That night, I turned off my phone. I didn't check it for 3 days. When I finally turned it back on, there were 11 missed calls from Mom, 4 from Garrett, 2 from Aunt Patty, and a text from Trent that said, "Hope you cooled off. Your mom is heartbroken. You should call her." I didn't call anyone. That was November. What happened over the next 8 months is something I never could have predicted. And honestly, looking back, I wouldn't change a single thing about how it played out. But it started with the worst holiday of my life and a silence that would reshape every relationship I had. The weeks after Thanksgiving were rough. I won't sugarcoat it. I went through a stretch where I barely functioned outside of work. I'd come home, eat something forgettable, sit on my couch, and stare at the wall until it was late enough to justify going to bed. I wasn't depressed exactly, or maybe I was, but it felt more like grief, like I was mourning something that had never actually existed. The version of my mom who would protect my secrets, the family dynamic where I mattered. That picture I'd been painting in my head for almost 3 decades had been ripped off the wall at Thanksgiving, and I was standing in an empty room trying to figure out what to do next. Dr. Adler was incredible during this time. I went from seeing her every other week to every week. She didn't push me to call Mom or forgive anyone. She just helped me sit with what happened and start to understand what it meant. One thing she said that gutted me was, "You weren't just betrayed by your mother at that table, Nolan. You were betrayed by the version of yourself that still believed she would change." And yeah, that one took me a few days to fully digest. Christmas came and went. I stayed home. Mom called on Christmas morning and I let it ring. She left a voicemail that was mostly crying and saying she missed me and that Trent felt terrible. I didn't believe the Trent part. I also noticed she never actually said she was sorry. She said she missed me. She said she wished I'd come home, but she never said I was wrong to share what you told me. That absence said everything. Garrett texted me on New Year's Eve. "Just a happy new year, bro. Hope you're good." I responded with a thumbs up emoji because I'm not a monster, but I also wasn't ready to pretend everything was fine. He didn't follow up. January was when things started to shift. It started small. My boss at the manufacturing firm, a guy named Craig, who'd been quietly solid to me for 3 years, pulled me into his office one afternoon. He told me that one of our clients, a mid-size aerospace parts company about an hour north, was looking for a lead engineer to oversee a new production line. The pay was almost double what I was making. The role was a step up in every way. Craig said he'd already recommended me. I stared at him. Why me? He looked at me like I'd asked him why water was wet. "Because you're the best engineer I've got, Nolan. You've been the best engineer I've got since your 2nd month here." I figured you knew that. I didn't know that. Not really. When you grow up being the kid whose accomplishments go in a drawer instead of on the fridge, you stop seeing them yourself. I interviewed the following week. The company was called Meridian Precision, and the guy who ran the engineering division, Leon, was this sharp, no-nonsense guy in his 60s who'd been building things his whole life. We talked for 2 hours, not just about engineering, about problem-solving, about how I think about what I'd build if I had unlimited resources. At the end, he shook my hand and said, I've interviewed 11 people for this position. You're the first one who made me forget I was conducting an interview. I got the offer, $38,000 a year, full benefits, relocation assistance, and a title that actually reflected what I could do. I accepted on the spot. Moving was exactly what I needed. New city, new apartment, new routine. The town was called Ashford, and it was one of those mid-sized places that had just enough going on to keep you entertained without being overwhelming. I found a 2-bedroom apartment near downtown, bought some actual furniture instead of the college leftover setup I'd been rocking, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was building something that was genuinely mine. Work was phenomenal. Leon became something I'd never really had before, which was a mentor. He pushed me hard, but he also believed in me in this vocal, unapologetic way that I wasn't used to. When I designed a retooling system that cut production waste by 18% in my first 3 months, he brought it up in a company-wide meeting and said, "This is what happens when you hire people who actually think." I almost didn't know how to process someone being publicly proud of me. It felt foreign, like hearing a song in a language you're only just starting to learn. Around March, I met Chloe. She was a project manager at a tech firm across the street from Meridian, and we met in the most boring way possible. We were both standing in line at the same coffee shop, both ordered the same ridiculously specific drink, and when the barista called out the order, we both reached for it at the same time. She looked at me and said, "If you think you're taking my oat milk latte with an extra shot and a dusting of cinnamon, you are deeply mistaken." I liked her immediately. We started dating in April. Chloe was smart, direct, funny, in a way that caught you off guard, and she had this quality that I'd never experienced in a partner before. She paid attention not just to the big things, but to the small ones. She noticed when I was quiet, and she'd ask about it without making it feel like an interrogation. She remembered things I said in passing and brought them up weeks later. She made me feel seen in a way that I was only just starting to understand I'd been starving for. I told her about Thanksgiving around our 6th date. We were sitting on her couch eating takeout, and she asked about my family. I gave her the short version, and she sat there for a long moment before she said, "Your mom handed your heart to someone who used it as a football." "That's not a small thing, Nolan." "I know," I said. "Do you, though?" she asked, "because you keep qualifying it? You keep saying she didn't mean to." She was trying her best. She didn't think Trent would do that, but the result is the same. You trusted her with something sacred, and she treated it like it was hers to distribute. Nobody had ever put it that plainly, not even Dr. Adler, who was more careful with her language. Chloe just said it, and hearing it from someone who had no history with my family, no bias, no agenda, it finally clicked into place. By May, I was in the best shape of my life professionally and personally. I had a job I loved, a boss who respected me, a girlfriend who actually saw me, and a therapist who kept me honest. I was sleeping well, eating well, exercising for the first time in years. I looked different. I carried myself different. The stutter I'd had as a kid, which occasionally still showed up when I was stressed, had completely disappeared. I felt like a different person. And that's exactly when Mom called again. I hadn't spoken to her since before Thanksgiving. 6 months of silence. She'd called a handful of times, and I'd let every call go to voicemail. Her messages had evolved from crying and guilt-tripping to shorter, more measured attempts. "Hi, honey. Just checking in. Call me when you can." I never could, but this call is different. It wasn't from Mom's number. It was from Garrett's. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Nolan, it's Garrett. Don't hang up." His voice sounded different, smaller, less confident. "Mom's in the hospital. She had a fall, broke her hip. She's okay, she's stable. But she's going to need surgery, and she's been asking for you." I closed my eyes, leaned back in my chair, let the information settle. "Okay," I said. "Thanks for telling me." "Are you going to come?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I said. "I'll think about it." "Nolan, she's your mom. I know who she is." "Garrett," he went quiet. Then he said something that surprised me. "Look, I know things have been messed up, and I know I haven't exactly been helpful, but she really does miss you. And between you and me, I think she knows she screwed up. She just doesn't know how to say it." That was the most self-aware thing Garrett had ever said to me. It wasn't enough, but it was something. I told him I'd think about it and hung up. Then I sat in my office for a long time, staring out the window at the parking lot, weighing everything I'd built against everything I'd left behind. I didn't rush. That's the thing about spending 6 months rebuilding yourself from the inside out. You stop reacting and start choosing. The old Nolan would have been in the car with him 20 minutes driving 3 hours to a hospital to comfort a woman who hadn't apologized, because that's what good sons do. The new Nolan sat with it, thought about it, talked to Dr. Adler about it, talked to Chloe about it. Chloe was the one who helped me see it clearly. We were sitting on my apartment balcony that evening, the sun going down behind the buildings, and she said, "You can go see your mom. That doesn't mean you forgive her. That doesn't mean you're reopening the door to the way things were. It just means you're choosing to show up as the person you've become on your terms." Dr. Adler said something similar in our session the next day. "This could be an opportunity, Nolan. Not for reconciliation necessarily, but for clarity. You've spent 6 months finding your voice. This is a chance to use it." So I made a plan. Not a revenge plan, Not a dramatic confrontation plan, just a plan for how I was going to handle this without losing myself in the process. I wrote down 3 things on a note card and put it in my wallet. 1. I will not pretend Thanksgiving didn't happen. 2. I will not accept an apology that doesn't acknowledge what she actually did. 3. I will not leave without asking her why. That last one was the big one. Why? Why did she tell Trent? Why did she share the most vulnerable thing I'd ever said to her? I'd been circling that question for 6 months, and I needed to hear the answer from her mouth, whatever it was. I drove down on a Saturday morning. 3 hours on the highway, same route I'd taken 100 times, but it felt different this time. I wasn't driving toward obligation. I was driving toward something I'd chosen. There's a difference, and if you've never felt it, I hope you do someday. Mom was in a rehab facility by the time I got there. The surgery had gone well, and she was recovering, but she'd be there for a few more weeks. Garrett met me in the parking lot. He looked tired, older than I remembered, which was weird because it had only been 6 months. He gave me one of those awkward bro hugs where neither person fully commits. We walked inside together. The facility smelled like industrial cleaner and cafeteria food, which is apparently the universal scent of healthcare. Mom was in a room at the end of a long hallway, sitting up in bed watching a cooking show on a small TV mounted on the wall. She saw me and her whole face changed. Not just surprise, something deeper. Her eyes filled up and her lips started trembling, and she reached out her hand like I was something she'd been afraid she'd lost. "Nolan," she whispered. "You came." "I came," I said. I didn't rush to her. I didn't grab her hand. I pulled a chair over to the side of her bed and sat down at a normal distance. Garrett hovered by the door like he wasn't sure if he should stay or go. "Garrett, can you give us a minute?" I said. He looked at Mom. She nodded. He left and closed the door behind him. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The cooking show host was explaining how to properly deglaze a pan, which felt absurdly inappropriate as background noise for the conversation we were about to have. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Better," she said. "The surgery went well. They say I'll be walking again in a few weeks with physical therapy." She paused. "How are you?" "I'm good, Mom. Really good, actually. I got a new job. I moved. I'm seeing someone." Her eyes lit up. "That's wonderful, honey. I wish I'd known." "You would have known if we'd been talking," I said. Not mean, just true. She looked down at her hands. I know I messed things up, Nolan. I've had a lot of time to think about it. Lying in this bed, not being able to move, all you can do is think. I need to ask you something," I said, "and I need you to answer me honestly. Not the version that makes you feel better, the real answer." She nodded slowly. "Why did you tell Trent?" She closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek. For a long moment I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she opened her eyes and looked at me, really looked at me, and said something I wasn't expecting. "Because I was ashamed." I waited. "When you told me all those things on the phone about the favoritism, about how invisible you felt, my first reaction wasn't empathy, Nolan. It was shame. I felt like the worst mother in the world. And instead of sitting with that, instead of calling you back and saying you're right and I'm sorry, I called Trent because I needed someone to tell me I wasn't a bad mom. I needed someone to make me feel better about what you'd said." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. "And Trent did exactly what Trent does. He got angry on my behalf. He told me you were being ungrateful and dramatic, and that he'd set you straight, and I let him. I let him because it was easier than facing the truth, which was that you were right about everything." The room was quiet except for the TV where the chef was now seasoning a chicken with way too much enthusiasm. "I was right," I said, not as a question. "You were right," she said. "Garrett was easier for me. He was outgoing and confident, and he reminded me of your father in all the ways that didn't hurt, and you were quiet and sensitive, and you reminded me of myself. And I think on some level, I resented that. Not you, never you, but the parts of me I saw in you that I didn't like about myself, the shyness, the self-doubt. And instead of helping you through it, I turned away from it because looking at it was like looking in a mirror I didn't want to face. I sat there for a long time, just breathing, processing. This was more honesty than I'd gotten from my mother in 29 years combined. "That's not an excuse," she continued. "I know that. I failed you, Nolan. Not because I'm a monster, but because I was a coward. And then when you finally told me how much it hurt, I was a coward again. I ran to Trent instead of running to you." I pulled the note card out of my wallet, looked at it. The first 2 items had been addressed. She wasn't pretending Thanksgiving didn't happen. Her apology was specific and acknowledged what she'd done and why. Number 3, she'd just answered without me even having to push, but I wasn't done yet. "I need you to understand something," I said. "I'm not the same person who left Trent's house on Thanksgiving. I've spent the last 6 months rebuilding my life without you in it, and it's the best my life has ever been. I have a job where people value me. I have a girlfriend who sees me. I have a therapist who helped me stop hating myself for wanting to be seen by my own mother." She flinched at that. "I didn't soften it. I didn't come here to punish you," I continued. "But I also didn't come here to pick up where we left off. If we're going to have a relationship going forward, it's going to be different. I'm not going to be the kid who shuts up and smiles anymore. And if you share something I tell you in private ever again with Trent or Garrett or anyone, we're done. Permanently." She nodded. "I understand." "One more thing," I said. "I want to have dinner with you, me and Garrett, before I leave tomorrow." And I want Trent there. Her eyes widened. Why Trent? Because he owes me an apology too. And because I have some things to say that the whole family needs to hear. Not at a Thanksgiving table where I'm ambushed at a dinner where I'm the one who set the terms. She stared at me for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, I'll make it happen." I stood up, leaned over, and kissed her on the forehead. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was a start. On my way out, Garrett was leaning against the wall in the hallway, pretending to look at his phone. "How did it go?" he asked. "We're having dinner tomorrow night," I said. "You, me, Mom, and Trent. Somewhere quiet. Not Trent's house. Can you set it up?" He looked at me like he was seeing someone he didn't quite recognize. Then he nodded. "Yeah, I'll make it happen." I walked out of that facility and into the afternoon sun, and for the first time in 6 months, I wasn't dreading what came next. I was ready for it. Garrett picked a steakhouse about 15 minutes from the rehab facility. Nothing fancy. Just one of those family-owned places with wooden booths and low lighting where the menus are laminated and the portions could feed a small village. Mom couldn't be there physically since she was still in recovery, but she joined on speakerphone propped up against the salt shaker. It looked ridiculous, but it worked. Trent showed up 5 minutes late, which I think was intentional. He walked in wearing a polo shirt and a facial expression that said he'd rather be literally anywhere else. He sat down across from me, gave me a nod that was supposed to pass for a greeting, and immediately picked up the menu like we were just 4 people having a casual Sunday dinner. "Put the menu down, Trent," I said. He looked up. His eyes narrowed. "Excuse me, I didn't ask you here to eat. I asked you here to talk. So put the menu down." He glanced at Garrett, who was sitting next to him, looking like a man trapped on a plane with no parachute. Garrett gave a tiny shrug. Trent put the menu down. "All right," Trent said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "Let's talk. At Thanksgiving, you took something my mother told you in confidence, something I had told her in confidence, and you used it to humiliate me in front of our entire family. You didn't pull me aside. You didn't ask me how I was doing. You stood up in front of 14 people and turned my pain into a performance." Trent's jaw tightened. "I was defending your mother. My mother didn't need defending. She needed to be honest. And instead of encouraging that, you gave her a way out. You made me the villain so she didn't have to face what she'd done. That's not defending someone, Trent. That's enabling them." From the phone on the table, Mom's voice came through. "He's right, Trent." Trent blinked. He clearly hadn't expected that. He looked at the phone, then back at me. "Diane, you told me the kid was attacking you. You were crying on the phone. What was I supposed to do?" "I was crying because I felt guilty." Mom said, "Not because Nolan was attacking. He was telling me the truth and I couldn't handle it. So I called you and I let you get angry for me, because it was easier than being accountable." The table got very quiet. Trent uncrossed his arms. He looked uncomfortable for the first time since I'd known him, which is saying something because this is a man who once argued with a restaurant manager for 45 minutes over a coupon and showed zero discomfort the entire time. "I didn't know the full story," Trent said finally. "Your mom made it sound like you were being ungrateful." I react. "You didn't react," I said. "You performed. You wanted to be the hero, the patriarch who puts the ungrateful kid in his place. And you didn't stop to think about whether the kid might actually have a point. You just swung." He stared at me. I could see something shifting behind his eyes. Not quite remorse, but something adjacent to it. Self-awareness may be creeping in like light under a door. "You're right," he said. The words came out like they physically hurt him. "I shouldn't have done that. Not like that. Not in front of everyone." He paused. "I'm sorry, Nolan." I nodded. "Thank you." Then I turned to Garrett. He immediately put his hands up. "What did I do at Thanksgiving when I was standing in the hallway telling you why I was leaving? You told me I was being dramatic. You've been doing that my whole life, Garrett. Every time I tried to express something real, you brushed it off. When I told you in 9th grade that I felt like Mom didn't notice me, you said I was overthinking it. When I told you at Dad's wedding that I felt like an outsider in our own family, you said I needed to lighten up. You're my older brother. You were supposed to have my back. And every single time you chose comfort over truth." Garrett looked at his hands. He didn't have a witty response for this. No golf story, no deflection, no easy charm to slide out from under the weight of what I was saying. He just sat there. And for maybe the first time in his life, he let the discomfort exist without trying to escape it. "I didn't realize how bad it was," he said quietly. "Honestly, Nolan, I wasn't paying attention, and that's on me. I was so busy being the kid who had it easy that I never stopped to think about what it was like for you." He looked up. "I'm sorry. I mean it." The phone crackled. Mom was crying softly. "I'm sorry too, Noah, for all of it. For the favoritism, for the silence. For telling Trent, for every time I made you feel like you weren't enough. You were always enough. I was just too broken to see it. I let that sit. I let all of it sit. The apologies, the admissions, the weight of decades of silence finally being broken. It didn't erase anything. It didn't undo the Thanksgivings I'd spent feeling invisible or the years I'd spent thinking something was wrong with me. But it was real. It was honest. And it was a start. "I'm not going to pretend we're fixed," I said. "We're not. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight, and I'm not going to fake it for anyone's comfort, but I'm willing to try, slowly, on my terms. And if anyone at this table or on this phone ever shares something I've said in confidence again, there won't be another dinner like this. There won't be another chance." Everyone nodded, even Trent. We ended up ordering food after all. Garrett got the biggest steak on the menu because of course he did. Trent got a burger and ate it in silence, which might be the most restrained I've ever seen the man. I got the grilled salmon, and it was actually pretty good. Mom stayed on the phone for another hour, chiming in here and there, sounding lighter than she had in months. It wasn't a movie ending. Nobody hugged and cried while inspirational music played. It was awkward and imperfect and real. And honestly, that's exactly what it needed to be. That was 3 months ago. Here's where things are now. I'm still at Meridian Precision. Leon promoted me to senior engineer last month, which came with a raise that made my eyes water when I saw the number. He told me he's grooming me to eventually run the division when he retires in a few years. I told him I'd have to think about it, which was a lie because I'd already mentally redecorated his office. Chloe and I moved in together 2 weeks ago. She insisted on adopting a cat the same weekend we moved. So now we have a calico named Biscuit who has zero respect for personal boundaries and has already knocked my coffee off the nightstand 3 times. I've never been happier. Mom and I talk once a week now. Short calls, careful calls. She's learning to ask questions instead of assuming, and I'm learning to answer them without bracing for disappointment. It's not the relationship I wanted as a kid, but it might be the one we can actually sustain as adults. She sent me a card last week that just said, "I'm proud of you, Nolan." I should have said it more. I put it on my fridge. Garrett and I are closer than we've ever been, which is still not that close, but it's progress. He started therapy himself, which shocked me more than anything else in this entire story. Apparently, the dinner shook something loose in him. He told me last week that he'd been carrying guilt about the favoritism for years but didn't know how to bring it up. I told him next time, just bring it up. We're brothers. That's what brothers are supposed to do. Trent is Trent. He's not going to become a different person overnight, but he did call me about a month after the dinner and asked how my new job was going. And when I told him about the production line I'd redesigned, he said, "That's impressive, kid." Coming from Trent, that's basically a standing ovation. As for me, I spent most of my life believing I was the problem. The quiet kid, the invisible son, the one who didn't shine bright enough to earn attention. And it took a catastrophic Thanksgiving, 6 months of silence, a therapist who didn't let me lie to myself, and a woman who saw me before I could fully see myself to understand the truth. I was never invisible. I was just surrounded by people who weren't looking. They're looking now.